Let's get started on how to submit a grant proposal. Now, this webinar is designed for folks who may not have a lot of experience submitting grant proposals, or folks who maybe have little experience submitting grant proposals, or anyone who just wants to polish up on the ins and outs of grant proposal. Now, if we move forward, I will explain a little bit about who Environmental Protection Network is, but just briefly. The main important part of this slide is that I'm part of our pro bono technical assistance team right in the middle there. We provide all sorts of resources and support that looks like one-on-one services with community-based organizations who reaches out to us for any sort of technical assistance requests. We have put a lot of energy into helping communities with grant proposals recently at the federal level, and now with the Grant Makers program is what our a lot of our energy has been going into. This is a really great slide, and you'll see it at the very end. So after we've gone through the grant proposal writing process, you'll see that we offer these 5 areas of opportunities. So we offer SAM.gov registration office hours, one-on-one virtual assistance. We offer draft reviews of your grant proposals. We also include a budget support and calculator that I'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation, and then pre-award and post-award resources. Again, we'll see this slide a little bit later on and I can expand on it, but if any of these opportunities or services pique your interest, feel free to contact me or the TICTAC, and we all work as a team to address all of these resources. And I will pass it to Andrea to give a little bit about EFC.
Great. Well, I am here on behalf of the New England Environmental Finance Center. The EFC, as we refer to ourselves, is one of the EPA's regional environmental finance centers. And we've been doing this work for over 20 years in building local partnerships and working on projects on all types of environmental issues. We're made up of a small 10-person team of planners, facilitators, technical support, financial support experts, and we're part of the University of Maine system located at the University of Southern Maine in Portland. Our mission is focused on building community and network capacity around funding and financing for environmental priorities. So when we think about that, that means doing work with all different types of communities. So municipalities, we work with nonprofits, we work with tribal communities and tribal nations. We are really here to support community-based organizations as well. Anyone who needs an extra helping hand to navigate and access the complicated world that is federal programs and federal funding, we're here and available for you. And we work primarily on climate adaptation and resilience, as well as a whole host of water management and community engagement and sustainable operating practices. So certainly if you're in Southeast New England, in kind of southern Rhode Island and Massachusetts, you might know about our SNEP program. And if you're working on any type of water infrastructure, do let us know because we have additional programming available for New England water infrastructure through our New network. We through all the work that we do, are prioritizing underserved and environmental justice communities and working to integrate climate resilience and environmental justice into all of those different pieces of our programs. For specifically the TICTAC, which we can talk a little bit more about, we are offering climate adaptation and technical assistance around assessing vulnerability and risk, adaptation planning and project prioritization, as well as working on particular projects and policies that you're prioritizing. And similar to EPN, we're here to give one-on-one consultation and support on your grant proposals, everything from supporting proposal narrative creation and work plans to budget management, as well as soon we will hopefully have a funding roadmap to help navigate the vast array of funding opportunities. All right, so Michelle, you want to take us away and walk through our agenda?
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to explain just briefly that we're both partners of the TICTAC, and that is why we're putting on this webinar. We all at the TICTAC team, work as a team. When you submit your intake requests with technical assistance requests, we evaluate it and take a look at which partners would be best fit to provide the response and the support for your requests. So that is how we are all connected. We are all part of the TICTAC team. Just wanted to clarify that. I know that sometimes that's a question that some folks have. On the screen, you'll see our agenda for the webinar. We have about 50 minutes and a lot of content, but hoping to keep a little bit of space at the end for question and answer. We're going to go through our grant identification, where to find grants, and navigating eligibility. We'll go through building a proposal, which includes letters of support, budget tips, narrative writing, and briefly go over sam.gov. And then lastly, we'll go through the grant cycle. What does that timeline look like from applicant to awardee, funding opportunities, and then the technical assistance that we will be leaving you with today. The first section we'll go through is where to find grants. So for the federal grants, you can visit grants.gov if you're not familiar. That's the go-to place for all types of federal grant opportunities. There's also the Federal Register as well, and these all are going to be linked. You'll have these access to the slides afterwards. We also have agency newsletters, pretty standard. If you're interested in EPA opportunities, you would sign up for the EPA newsletter and so forth. We also have the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers that have a funding database I was actually exploring just yesterday, and you can filter by different TICTACs depending on the region that you're located in. EPN, Environmental Protection Network, my organization, we also have a really great newsletter. I know everyone says that, but our newsletter is pretty great. It comes out every couple weeks and it has a lot of opportunities, updates. You'll stay in the know about what's happening also on the federal level. But for the purposes of this slide, any grant opportunities come through that there as well. And then NEEFC, you have your funding landscape guide as well.
Yes, yeah. So the EFC has a detailed funding landscape guide. It does date back to 2021, so it can be very useful as a starting place to see where we go from there. But we also will be updating and creating a funding roadmap for the TICTAC to be able to catalog all of the different resources out there.
Awesome.
And as Michelle said, I've been working as a nonprofit fundraiser for the last 20 years in my career, and am excited to kind of add into this conversation dialogue around private foundation grants. It's true, we don't know what is coming and what the kind of next steps are around some of the funding opportunities that are available through the federal government, including the Thriving Communities Grant. We are getting all the messages that we're continuing to move ahead, so we encourage you to do so as well, knowing that that grant application is coming up. At the same time, we recognize that private foundations are going to be in a position to step up in the face of any type of funding uncertainty from the federal government. So we really do encourage you to also consider the whole universe of private foundation grants. Best places to start are truly the philanthropy support organizations that each state has. I'm based up in Maine, and the Maine Philanthropy Center has a very in-depth database of all different types of grant opportunities from all the foundations that are supporting Maine nonprofits and other organizations and municipalities. I do also encourage you to do a little snooping on your peer organizations in their annual reports and on their websites. Very often you'll be able to see a pretty substantial list of funding where that's coming from through acknowledgments and appreciation. And that's always a good place if you're looking at one of your peers, somebody who understands what you do, or you understand that your work is similar. You can also look at nonprofit 990s as another possibility there. Many states have councils of governments as kind of regional or national collectives that are there to support municipalities. And I would encourage you, whether you're at a nonprofit, a community-based organization, or a municipality yourself, you do consider checking out your local COG to see if they have resources. Often they can help to pair municipalities and nonprofits and find grant funding there. And then there there are a few different online databases. The biggest one is Candid's Foundation Directory. I'd actually encourage you to go primarily through your local philanthropy support organization, because often they're able to access that without you having to add on another subscription. And then if you're looking for a community foundation that often has other details there, the Council on Foundation has a community foundation locator that will help to match you right to your place.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes,
Mhm.
the next section we're going to go through is eligibility. So for eligibility, navigating eligibility, it all comes back to the RFP. The RFP stands for the Request for Proposals. It's also known as the Notice of Funding Opportunity. I think there's a couple other abbreviations, but for the purposes of this webinar, I will be referring to it as the RFP. So the Request for Proposals is the announcement that there's an opportunity available and that they're seeking proposals, applications, ideas, projects. So the RFP is really going to be your holy grail. Most of the questions that you come across as you're filling out the application is going to be, you're going to come back to the RFP to find the answers to that. So for eligibility, first and foremost, I recommend reading through the entire RFP. I know it takes some time, but it really is quite important. You'll read in the RFP if your organization or entity type is eligible for the application. So the second thing is to know what type or status the RFP is looking for. Then you're going to take a look at the grant scope. So does the grant align with the mission or the project that you would like to propose or that you want to either expand or continue? Where is it located or the demographic requirements? So what is the population that you primarily work with? What communities do you work with, and does it fit in the needs of the RFP? Then you also take a look at partnership and match requirements. So I know that the Community Change Grant, for example, through the EPA required particular types of partnerships and required that those partnerships look a certain way, right? There are some RFPs that require partnerships, some that don't, some that if you have a partnership, your application is a stronger application. So it's important to read through the RFP for that as well. And then lastly, if you have any other questions or are confused about maybe maybe they didn't answer a question that's in the RFP, you're always welcome and encouraged to reach out to the agency point of contact or your program officer. I think that's eligibility. And then we'll go into partnerships just briefly because I think that if we move on, I think quite a few of us at the grassroots and community-based organizations know what partnerships look like and how to navigate those. But just as a refresher and to keep in mind in the context of grant proposals, you always want to check your partner's eligibility to make sure that there are some RFPs that require everyone that's going to be on the application to not have a fiscal sponsor, for example, or have their 501(c)(3), things like that. So we're checking the eligibility of your partners, the ones that you either already work with or are interested in partnering for the purposes of the proposal. You're going to check if your partner is a good fit with your project, with the mission that you're trying to accomplish. You're going to ask guiding questions. So these questions I find very useful. So what is everyone's experience with grant funding? Does one or other, do you or your other partners have more experience managing grant funds? Who has closer ties to the community on the ground? And what are the capacity levels? Time, because grants and grant management takes time, energy, experience, knowledge, administrative support. Those kinds of things are good questions to ask as you're looking at partnerships. Then the next step in the timeline, you'll take a look at responsibilities. So who's going to be in charge of what part of the application process, but also the project. And lastly, I highly recommend establishing a shared timeline so that you have plenty of time to work on the project, to work on the proposal, and not wait till the last minute just in case there are any questions or extra support that you might need. Here are some examples of what letters of support look like. They can be letters of support, letters of collaboration, letters of commitment, memorandum of understanding. You'll also see that as called MOUs as well, a memorandum of understanding, and then a memorandum of agreement. So these are all different types of letters of support. Some RFPs require letters of support. Some RFPs very clearly state that they don't want extra letters and they don't accept extra letters. So that's why I've added at the top, if permitted and needed. So again, we'll come back to the RFP to see what their particular requirements are. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that one, Andrea?
No, I would just suggest that for some private foundations, they're gonna be very clear in whether you do or do not need partners, and whether you are or are not allowed to apply via partnerships. So just, as much as the private foundation request for proposals will probably be shorter and less detailed than many of the governmental RFPs, you do want to try and suss out as much as you possibly can and be very clear about following those rules, just as you would with a federal program.
Yeah, thank you. And then we'll go into the budget section. This is always the best, the most exciting part of a proposal, right? Here are a list of possible budget categories. Now, as we know, the federal grants are more stringent about what that budget looks like and ask for a lot more detailed information. But the possible budget categories include personnel, fringe benefits, travel, participant support, supplies, equipment, construction, and contractual fees as well. Now, the next few slides, I will go into generally important key things to consider when you're putting together a budget, or even when you're starting to think about putting together the budget, right? So the budget is on a spreadsheet. You're looking at the categories, and so you're asking yourself questions around, okay, what goes into this? What do I need to include? First and foremost, a budget needs to be considered reasonable. Now, what's reasonable? For example, if you're holding a focus group and you're going to be putting a line item for supplies for the focus group, maybe that includes notebooks, pens, pencils, water bottles. It is reasonable to ask for $500 for the supplies for this focus group. It would be unreasonable to ask for $15,000, right? So first and foremost, is the budget that you're proposing reasonable? I really like the comment that you made the other day, Andrea, about the straight face test.
Yes. Yeah. So essentially what I told Michelle is that you want your budget to pass what I would describe as the straight face test, meaning if you handed it to somebody else, could you be serious and feel confident in submitting this budget and feel like it is accurate and really representing, or are you kind of snickering behind your hand because you know that this is pretty outlandish. So you want to make sure that you're passing that test when you're creating your budget.
Yeah, I think that was a great metaphor. The next thing that you'll consider is if it's allowable. So again, we're coming back to the RFP. Most of the time, the RFP will include if particular things are allowed in the budget or to be funded. For example, there are quite a few RFPs that will not fund alcohol beverages at events, let's say, for example, but instead you could add fees for like catering or food or sodas or teas or whatever. So just double checking what is allowable in the budget. Next, we'll take a look at allocable line items in the budget. So if we're going to stick with the sort of like focus group idea, at the focus group, maybe you want to have food. It would be allocable if you have fees for catering, right? If you want food at the event. It would not be allocable to include a rock climbing instructor, for example. And obviously, this is an extreme example, but these are questions to sort of ask yourself as you're putting together and building that budget to be submitted. And lastly, is it necessary? So again, these examples are sort of to like just drive the nail in. If you're at an event and there is transportation that's needed, right? I know that in a lot of rural communities, some people might need transportation assistance. It would be very reasonable and very necessary to maybe include renting a van to pick up people for the focus group. Now, would a helicopter be necessary? Absolutely not. But those are questions to ask yourself as you're also putting together the budget. I think that there's one other slide on the budget. Yes. So here's a pretty dense slide, but depending on the RFP, you're dividing up your budget by year, by quarter. That's something to think about and consider. And as I think a lot of us know, budgets require it's sort of a timeline and a project plan that is put together in the format of a spreadsheet. Many grants will include a budget template, not always. You can always reach out to probably either one of our organizations for budget templates as well, if that's necessary. Always refer to industry estimates, which is we're kind of going back to the is it necessary? Is it sort of a fair price, right? And as you're putting together that budget, also keeping in mind cost increases. So that could look like inflation, salary, hourly rates, adjustments, any sort of benefits that might change from year to year as you're looking at staff costs as well. And then just quick tips, right, to round to the nearest dollar to make things sort of easy to read. And then as you're putting together the project narrative and combining it with the budget, that you're explaining how all the pieces of the budget will fit together in the project narrative. And lastly, for federal grants specifically, again, this is a budget proposal. That's part of the proposal in your application. Most of the time, you'll submit your budget and you'll work closely with the program officer or the agency contact to adjust and finalize your budget. Anything you want to add? I think the next page is a little bit more about private foundations.
Yeah,
Yes.
so this is budgets are actually one of the places where private foundations versus federal and state applications are going to differ pretty substantially. The first piece is just a strong reminder to always include indirect costs. So those are costs for things like your office, your computers, the benefits that staff are getting. All of those different pieces fit into kind of a lump section of indirect costs. Typically, a private foundation will tell you what the maximum allowance for indirect costs would be. If you don't find that, I tend to go to 10 or 15%. But again, if you have any questions there, reaching out to your foundation program officer to ask that specific question is always a reasonable thing. Some will say no, indirect costs are allowed. Unless there is that exclusion, I very much encourage you to include a small line item for that, percentage based. Also, comparing to what Michelle talked about on the previous slide, most foundation grant proposals include a budget that isn't really the beginning of a conversation. It very much is, this is what we expect to expend on our project. And so you want to make sure that you're fairly confident in that. When you're doing your final report, there is always room to say, you know, we spent $3,000 instead of $4,000 on a particular part of the project. That is fine as long as you can kind of provide some narrative as to why you haven't come in exactly on spot. And you want to make sure that you are pretty confident in the numbers that you're sending in. The other challenge with foundation grants is a recognition that most foundations are going to not want to be the only funder on a project. And sometimes they're not going to want to be the first funder on a project. And so you're going to want to make sure that you have an understanding of all of the different funding that avenues that you'll be reaching out to in order to add up to the total for your overall project. And most foundations will ask you to separate into columns where their money is specifically going line by line versus where other funds are being sourced from other places in order to create the full budget. You are often allowed to include both existing secured funds, so foundation support you've already gotten, and list planned applications to other places that would, if received, fill the gap.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
On the screen, you'll see two resources from the Environmental Protection Network, EPN, but they are definitely not all of the resources available to you. You'll see that we have a Budgets for Beginners worksheet. It's a very easy to use worksheet that our grants team at EPN put together and has worked really hard on. I would say that that's applicable to many different types of grant opportunities. And we also have a Budgets for Beginners presentation that I will say is a little bit more tailored to federal grants. But if you wanted something a little bit more interactive, that video my colleague Caitlin put together and is also very helpful. And I want to just note that if you're interested in applying for the Thriving Communities Grant Makers program, they also have budget resources and a budget template to use as well. So don't hesitate to look for that. And if you have any trouble finding that, please reach out. I think that the next slide goes through, yes, this is just a quick screenshot of what that budget worksheet looks like at the EPN. It goes through sort of a glossary section, a section where you can fill in the questions, and then there's an example section as well. This is the Budget for Beginners presentation. Just wanted to throw it out here. Some people learn in different ways, and so I think this is a really great way to learn as well. All right, so writing the narrative. This is where a lot of the storytelling happens, right? And storytelling is just as important as having all of your information cited and your data, connected to the sources. So proposal writing is where you'll be introducing your community and describing what makes your community unique, the strengths of your community, and the specific challenges to your community. Um, this is also where you're going to be describing your organization's history, the mission and vision, and also specifically the organization's history in the engagement that you're going to be proposing, right? What have you already done? What makes you the right organization to fund for this project? You'll also be going over the program overview, so very specifically going through what it is you're proposing and what that timeline looks like and the stages and phases of the project. And lastly, the work plan. This is where you're going to be including outputs and outcomes. Now, I think this is important to highlight. The outputs is the sort of tangible activities, the focus groups, the resources that you'll be creating or continuing. And the outcomes is basically you could think about it as like asking yourself, how do you know that you are successful? What is the change that you'll see in the community when you know that the outputs have done their job correctly? Some writing best practices and tips and ideas to just remember and think about is always, always, always coming back to the RFP. I will not finish saying that until the end of the webinar. Your RFP is your holy grail. So in the RFP, you'll take a look at any sort of unique requirements that the RFP will outline. You'll take a look at any questions, specific questions in your proposal narrative that you need to address. It's important to keep an eye out for word count and page limits. So those are very very strict. They will not review past that. Sometimes they won't even open your application if it's over the page limit. So keep an eye on that. Kind of keep that in the back of your head. Sometimes the hardest part of grant writing is having to condense it down to the word limit. So
Mhm.
we are here to help with that as well. In different sections, you're going to be including all of your data, your statistics, and all of that should be cited. But just as important as I had said, as powerful storytelling, I think that I know of a lot of resources out there for storytelling, but really getting into the details of how your work is going to impact the lives of the people that we all care about, right? We want everyone to live full and healthy lives. Then you're also going to keep an eye out for any rubrics or scoring information that sometimes are included in the RFP. So, how are they going to grade your proposal to be selected or not selected? So keep that in mind. I know that at EPN we have rubrics for most of the grants that we are reviewing to help our reviewers be able to give feedback accurately and effectively. And lastly, again, if you have any questions or any other concerns with the submission process, you can reach out to your program officer.
Uh,
Yes,
I'll
Andrea, go ahead.
I'll just add that some of the differences that you're going to experience between governmental and private foundations is actually often that private foundations are not going to request the detail of a work plan and a kind of step-by-step process in the same way that federal grants and state grants will. You are going to have to work a lot more within some pretty constraining word counts. And just a word on word counts, it's very important that you pay attention to whether it's a word count or a character count.
Mhm.
And I very much encourage you to kind of turn that on as you're creating and writing your proposal. There's an extra added thing that often gets me when I'm sending in proposals is when there's a character count. Sometimes they include spaces and sometimes they don't. So it is in your best interest to log into, if there's an online portal to submit your grant proposal, to do so before the very last minute when you've written everything in a Word doc or a Google doc and then you're ready to port them over. Make sure you understand which of those different requirements they will be applying to your proposal, because there's a lot of times where you have the perfect wording, you drop it into the box on a form, and it cuts it off because, in fact, they would not, or they were counting spaces as extra characters. So just be very careful of that. It is it is one of the number one things that I hear from nonprofits around frustration in submitting grant proposals. I also want to highlight that with private foundations, there's a huge variation in accessibility around program officers. If you can absolutely build a connected relationship with the program officer for the program that you are applying to, it is always worth sending in an email just to say hi and to say, you know, having one or two questions that you'd like to ask in order to kind of open that door, especially with private foundations. A lot sits on the relationship between the individual program officer and your organization. So if you have an opening to build that connection, I very much recommend that you do. However, many times, and especially for small family foundations, you'll see noted that they take no questions and that there is no opportunity to connect. So don't be discouraged in that case. Do your best, but you may, in some situations, not see any type of rubric, any type of scoring information, and you're just kind of putting something out there into the world and crossing your fingers. If you can and you don't get any feedback ahead of time, once you learn whether your application was successful or not, I do encourage you to then use that opportunity to follow up with the program officer and see if you can get a little bit more information, because even if you didn't get that funding, that can be an opening to build that relationship so you can get funding in the future.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about SAM.gov just briefly. SAM.gov is specific to federal grants. So for anyone who may be unfamiliar with SAM.gov, we can move to the next slide. SAM.gov is, it stands for, oh, I was on the previous slide. But SAM.gov is required for if you're applying for System for Award Management. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. SAM.gov is required to register if you're interested in being in contract with the federal government. So if you're applying for any type of federal government grants, then you're required to register. It used to be called, I can't remember what it was used to be called, but this has been implemented for a few years now. And it does take a little bit of time, right, to submit this. It's important to double check that you have your SAM.gov UEID number and registration before submitting any sort of federal grants. But I'd want to name, because this is kind of, I've seen this as a frequent question. It is different than your EIN number. Your EIN number is your employer identification number. You usually get through the IRS, I believe. It is different. So, but you do use your your EIN number and other formal documents, and particularly when you became a formalized 501c3, that is those documents is what you'll use to submit your registration for SAM.gov. And there is no fee, highlighted, no fee to register with SAM.gov. And SAM.gov will give you access as well to grants.gov that I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. This is the top of sort of the dashboard, what the top of the dashboard looks like when you're on SAM.gov. So it'll walk you through these steps, and so you'll know when your registration has been submitted for approval. You'll get an email as well. At the top right, where that red arrow is, you'll see a number 1 if you've submitted one registration submission. And don't be discouraged if it takes a little bit of time. Right now, I think that it's probably going to take a little bit extra time, but normally it'll take between 7 to 10 business days to hear back about your registration. Now, here are 2 resources. We have a guide for SAM.gov registration that includes screenshots. It's really great. And then I've also kept and included the Tic Tac from Great Lakes. They have a really great SAM.gov and grants.gov guide with, I believe it also has screenshots.
And I will just suggest that anybody who's planning to apply to the Thriving Communities Environmental Justice grants, the EJ for New England, this is what you should do right now, especially because Michelle has rightfully identified we don't know how long it's going to take, or if there will be delays there, and knowing that the original kind of baseline process takes a little more than a week. Please do fill that out now so you don't run into the need for something expedited or find yourself out of luck when you're putting in that application on the 14th.
Yeah, great point. So the grant timeline. I think that this is actually quite important. I know that I also have a little bit of private foundation background, and some of this was unfamiliar to me, but grant process and how it works. So we have these three phases, right? So we have the first application phase, we have the second selection and pre-award phase, and then third implementation and post-award phase. So the next slide will go into the application phase. The application phase includes, like I'd said, this is another name for an RFP, funding opportunity announcement, the NOFO, notice of funding opportunity, basically the announcement that they're now receiving applications and proposals and this funding is available, right? So that is released, first step. Secondly, for federal grants, like Andrea just mentioned, you would sign up for sam.gov, make sure all your registration is up to date and you're ready and eligible to apply and to start working on your grant proposal. Third, you'll complete your proposal and submit your application based on all of the requirements found in the RFP, very specific to the requirements that are found in the RFP or on this slide, the FOA. And then lastly, the application will be reviewed. That's out of your hands. That's when it's been submitted and they're working on reviewing all of the applications and that takes some time, right? The second phase, as you'll see, is called the selection and pre-award phase. So from the federal grants level, this is the time when you'll be building a relationship with your program officer. You'll be in communication. There'll probably be emails back and forth. You'll have been selected, right? So you're taking a look at if the budget that you submitted originally is going to stay, if there's any adjustments that your program officer believes that needs to be made. This is also when you're going to be submitting all your assurances and certifications. There's a lot of paperwork that is involved in this part, a lot of signed documents. I know that at the very bottom here, you'll see that the Environmental Protection Network has a pretty thorough list of for federal grant applications specifically. A very extensive list of what this pre-award phase looks like. And then lastly, you'll be reviewing procurement and requirements and preparing any contracts with the RFP that the RFP requires. But you'll be working with your program officer. And if there are any questions or concerns about this phase, EPN is also here to help. The TICTAC is here to help as well with navigating some of that, like the administrative task that is this in-between phase. Anything you want to add, Andrea? Oh, no, I think there's another, yes, slide for you. And then thirdly, the post-award phase is when you get to implement the project. So depending on how the funding works, you get the money up front or you'll get reimbursed. And you should have that information in the RFP and you'll be clarifying that information with your program officer when you'll get that funding and how you'll be receiving it. The work does not stop, right? The administrative work does not stop. You'll be reporting. So this is when you'll be reporting either quarterly, every 6 months, every year, depending on what kind of agreement you have with the agency. Auditing. We are expecting full transparency. We are expecting that the next 4 years there will be increased auditing, increased scrutiny. So as you're applying for federal grants, just keep that in mind that it's amazing and an incredible opportunity to get a lot of this funding and this money. And you'll have to really be crossing your T's, dotting your I's in the next 4 years as the scrutiny of auditing will probably increase. And lastly, towards the end of your grant cycle, you'll close out and submit any reports that are required to complete the grant cycle.
Oh. All right. So
Nice.
I'm going to back up and
Yeah.
it looks like we had a slide about the difference between private foundation and governmental grants. I'm going to come back to this slide and walk you through some of the differentiations before we move forward. So importantly for private foundations, when we're thinking about the application phase, you're going to see either a request for proposals or sometimes what's called a letter of inquiry call. A letter of inquiry is kind of a step before filling out a full proposal. And those LOIs are usually 1 to 2 pages long. They're a lot more flexible and free form in terms of what you can submit, but only a small percentage of the folks who send in one of those letters of inquiry will be invited to go to a full proposal stage. So keep in mind that you may be asked to kind of provide the high-level snapshot that really makes the case without going really in depth, and then going to that second stage of the proposal. When you are thinking about applying to a foundation grant, certainly there's an increasing trend of foundations to offer pre-application webinars, similar to what we're seeing in the federal space or what's happening there. So I very much encourage you, if you can go live, definitely do so. Foundation program officers will see your name there, and there is value in that. The more familiarity you can build, the better. And if you can't, they're almost all recorded at this point. So do check that out. Again, I'm just going to remind you to try and connect with the program officer before submitting a draft or submitting a full proposal, and see if they'll give you any feedback either on a draft or on a set of different programmatic ideas, and see what they would recommend that you highlight and focus on. Then go ahead and draft your narrative, your budget, and other supporting materials, and submit that application. Unlike the federal process, there's not usually an in-depth negotiation either on a work plan or a budget once you've been selected for a grant. They're often also not reimbursement based, as many federal and state funding is, but instead you'll get the full chunk of money up front, or you'll get some portion of it, maybe year one or the first half a year, and then a second installment. After you are selected for a grant, there will be a usually fairly simple grant contract and acknowledgement recommendations that will come to you, that will explain how they expect you to talk about your receipt of this funding. And many foundations are now doing direct bank transfers, so keep in mind you may need some help from whoever's doing finance to get that information to the foundation. And then a big change in terms of implementation, most often there may be some type of midterm check-in on a report, or a midterm report required, but for the most part, the general private foundations will only request a final report. One of the key pieces here is that many foundations will have rules a lot around when you can access additional funds or even apply again. And so many foundations will not let you reapply for a grant until a final report is filed. So keep that in mind as you're setting up your schedule and calendar. And many foundations will have a series of years that you are not allowed to reapply if you've received funding. So just pay attention to what all of those different rules are and plan your applications accordingly. All right, I'm going to jump through these slides again that we've already seen, and we'll end on our funding spotlight.
Yes, so we have our funding spotlight. If you're in Region 1, which I think most of us are, we have the Thriving Communities Grant Makers Program, right? So if you're unfamiliar with this is the $600 million that came through the federal government. And this is really designed for nonprofits, institutions of higher education, local governments, community-based organizations, Native American organizations to apply for funding for environmental concerns, environmental justice projects and programs happening across the country. But specifically our grant maker, if you go to the next slide, is Health Resources in Action, our Region 1 grant maker. They are our lead, they are the grant maker, and they work with a few different other organizations to really put together a fabulous team to do outreach and support for community-based organizations to access this funding. I did see a comment in the chat, and I think it is relevant for me to bring up now. Yes, there is a lot of announcements, a lot of executive orders. There are a lot of information coming through the pipeline in this present moment. As far as we know, in this very moment, Grant Makers is still open, it's still accepting applications. I really trust the Grant Makers team. So as soon as they are sure of information, I know that they will share it. So I recommend getting on their listserv. You can always reach out to me, reach out to, I know that Cynthia, Stacy are all incredible people at Health Resources in Action. Yes, I think listserv is going to be the best way to find out if anything changes. And I just want to encourage you that as you're working on these grant makers applications, A, you're building skills, but B, a lot of the documents and the narratives that you're putting together will most likely and hopefully be applicable to further and additional grants opportunities moving forward. But as right now, we know that that is we're keeping the status quo. It's still accepting applications, and that first deadline is February 14th, Valentine's Day. And if we move forward, I think we'll go through. Oh, okay, great. Well, I was gonna go through just our technical assistance opportunities one last time at the Environmental Protection Network. So again, at the beginning, I stated this, and I just want to circle back to it now that we've gone through the entire application process. EPN offers sam.gov office hours. We actually have office hours today. And they're every 2 weeks. Those office hours break out into specific rooms depending on your level of concern or of questions. It goes from pretty basic questions like you've never even signed on to sam.gov before, and it expands to, okay, you are already in sam.gov, you already have your UEID, now navigating grants.gov. We also have our one-on-one assistance. So what makes EPN really wonderful, and I'm really proud of this, is our vast EPA alumni, is who we call everyone who's worked previously for the EPA and now maybe is retired or no longer works for the EPA for one reason or another, is part of our network of volunteers, and they offer their time pro bono to community-based organizations to assist with all sorts of requests. That could include technical assistance like if you need help reading or understanding a water quality report, or it can be if you have questions about a specific grant proposal. We have volunteers who have experience in all types and all sectors of the EPA. We also have draft reviews. So if you're submitting a grant proposal and you need a second pair of eyes, we can work together to get someone to review and give you feedback. We also have our budget support and calculator. We have a calculator that our grants team put together here. Let me take a look at my notes. I just want to make sure I name this correctly. Access our modified total direct cost and indirect cost calculator. That is linked at the beginning on that first slide at the beginning with all the different bubbles of the EPN opportunities that you can click. And if you have any questions, again, reach out to me. I will connect you, or the Tic Tac will connect you with the right resources and support. And lastly, we have the pre-award and post-award resources, which I already went over, but once you've been selected, how to complete that process. And I believe that is all I wanted to go to. Did you want to go through your resources and opportunities as well? Yeah.
Yes. And then I will drop into the chat the link to sign up for the Environmental Justice for New England. That's the grant makers email list, so that you all can have that easily accessible as well. So here at the EFC, we are available to help in two kind of key areas. The first one being funding assistance. So we can also help navigate not only the Environmental Justice for New England grant application, just like EPN, we are available for all different types of funding support and guidance. We can give you tips and support on proposal writing, work plans, budgets. We can absolutely take a look at your proposal and give you feedback. Again, whether that's for a government grant or for environmental justice or climate resilience private foundation funding. We will offer that one-on-one consultation, and we'll be offering a number of grant writing and management workshops over the next few months and into the future. And in additional areas, we have this climate adaptation technical assistance. So both support around the implementation side of doing climate vulnerability and risk studies, looking at how we can engage the community in climate adaptation planning and project prioritization. And we have deep expertise in adaptation projects and policies, nature-based solutions, all different types of water management, stormwater, flooding, drinking water, etc. So please do reach out to us. We will be offering another webinar in the TikTok series in the end of February, specifically on flooding and how communities can manage the impact of flooding on their infrastructure as well as drinking water and other types of pieces. So please do keep an eye out for that and join us. But yeah, really happy to, I mean, we have not a ton of time left, but happy to answer any questions. And in the meantime, I'll drop in the email list for the grant makers.
Yeah, and I would love to encourage, and I know that this is not everyone's favorite part of a webinar, but if you could take a few minutes to fill out the survey, it really helps us know if what we're providing is helpful, how to improve. And in that same vein, if there are any parts of the webinar today that you would love to see sort of like zoomed in on and a little bit more detailed information about whether it's budget, narrative writing, what the difference between outputs and outcomes, anything like that that you'd like to see us put a webinar on for, please include that in the chat so that we can keep note of that as we're building out our webinar series. We do have a couple minutes.
And I'll
Yeah.
just highlight, so Chris dropped in our intake form for the TICTAC, the Technical Assistance Center. So the easiest way or one of the most direct ways to get support from either the EFC, from EPN, and from the other technical assistance partners within the TICTAC is to use the intake form. You are welcome to reach out to us to get help filling out the intake form if you need. And so I very much encourage you, if you're running into trouble or if that feels like too big of a push or too big of a challenge for you, please do get in touch with Michelle, myself, or someone from the TICTAC team, and we can help get you into that program. And I will go ahead and, so if you go on to the TICTAC website, which I can drop in a second, there's more information on our flooding webinar and a chance to register there.
Yeah, I also just wanted to set expectations. As you can imagine, the holidays happened. The grant makers had opened their grant application process right before the holidays. Now people, I feel like, are really kind of back on their computers and back working on these applications. And the deadline for the first deadline for the grant makers is February 14th. So we have been pretty inundated with a lot of questions and emails as of the last couple weeks. So if you could just be patient with us. So as you're submitting that TICTAC intake form, I believe that we're asking around 7 days to hear back from us. And I would say that the technical assistance request sort of timeline to be completed is 7 to 10 business days. On a good day. So if you could just kind of keep that in mind as you're reaching out for assistance. The February 14th deadline for grant makers is not the only deadline. Hopefully we will have the next deadline in May. But yeah, we are just asking for your patience as we really try to do our best to fulfill all of the requests that are coming in and work through them on a timely basis. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yes, 5 to 10 days for everything. Thank you so much. Yeah, is there any other questions that we can answer in the last couple minutes?
I'm just seeing a question from Jean saying, can we say again how you help communities with nature-based solutions, community planning, etc. They have a lot of planning underway in Vermont, and they'd love help being coordinated and justice-led. The best way to access that support is to fill out that intake form that we've been dropping in. And articulate the specific question or challenge that you're running into, and then the TICTAC will connect you with the right members of the TICTAC team in order to start working on that project. So we are available for, everything from, can you do a quick review of this application, to give me some high-level feedback, to can you come and help us do a community-based engagement around climate prioritization. Just send into the TICTAC and they will help to connect you with the right folks.
Yeah, and to add to that, I just wanted to name some of the partners that the TICTAC has. So on the TICTAC team at University of Connecticut, there's like a wide range of professionals and people with different types of experience. I know that there are social workers and advocacy people who have done advocacy at the community level. That's just on the Yukon team, but in addition to that, there are partner organizations that include us at the Environmental Protection Network, Andrea at the New England Northeast.
Mhm.
Which one is it?
The New England Environmental
Okay.
Finance Center.
Environmental Finance Center. You have Yukon, obviously, and then other partners that do a lot more community engagement and community planning include Groundwork USA, the New England Rural Health Association, and the Institute for Native American Studies. So we do try to, I'm trying not to use nonviolent language. We try to address the challenge from different angles with the span of our team. All right, it is 1 o'clock. If there are any additional questions, we will note them. And please feel free to email us with additional questions. I hope that this was helpful. Please fill out the survey if you have a minute or two. It does help us. And I'm wishing all of us a grounded and as peaceful as possible day. Um, Yes, we will keep working, stay organized, and if there are any updates with valid changes to any of the systems or the opportunities, you will hear from us through those emails. Until then, good luck, and we will talk soon. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a beautiful day.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.